Imagine walking in your backyard and stumbling upon a massive, glowing vein of pure gold or a gushing oil well. You would instantly think you've won the ultimate geographic lottery, expecting your country to transform into a futuristic utopia. You'd imagine flying cars and perfect healthcare. But history shows us a deeply disturbing, almost paradoxical reality. If you look at the global map, the countries blessed with the most staggering abundance of natural wealth, diamonds, cobalt, oil, and rare earth metals, are very often the poorest, most unstable, and most violent places on Earth. This isn't just a streak of bad luck. Economists call this terrifying phenomenon the resource curse, or the paradox of plenty. Statistically speaking, a developing country whose economy relies heavily on the export of a single natural resource is significantly more likely to experience a devastating civil war or a sudden, violent military coup. Instead of building modern schools, pristine hospitals, and functioning infrastructure, the massive influx of wealth is entirely siphoned off. This leaves the general population trapped in grinding, inescapable poverty, struggling to survive day by day, while a tiny, heavily armed elite hoards billions of dollars in offshore bank accounts. Completely untouchable. But why does this happen? Why does discovering a literal mountain of valuable treasure feel less like a blessing from the heavens, and more like signing a brutal, irreversible national death warrant for your entire country? The answer isn't just about simple human greed. It lies in a toxic, highly combustible mix of macroeconomics, structural corruption, and a ruthless game of global geopolitics played by superpowers. Let's break it down. To truly understand this devastating curse, we first have to take a step back and look at how normal, healthy economies actually manage to grow and sustain themselves. In a typical country that isn't blessed with massive underground oil reserves, the government has absolutely no choice but to rely entirely on the productivity of its citizens. To generate any meaningful tax revenue, the state is forced to invest heavily in public education, modern infrastructure, and a fair, functioning legal system. This creates a mutually beneficial environment where the people can start businesses, innovate, and thrive, generating wealth that ultimately flows back to the state. In this system, the government is forced to be accountable. It's a simple equation. If the citizens remain poor and uneducated, the government remains poor and weak. But discovering a massive deposit of natural resources completely short-circuits this entire democratic mechanism, breaking the fundamental social contract between the state and its people. If you suddenly find an ocean of black oil beneath the sand, you absolutely do not need millions of highly educated, healthy citizens to extract it. Instead, you just need a few incredibly expensive, high-tech drilling rigs, a handful of specialized foreign engineers, and a whole lot of heavy machinery. Oh, and you will also need a highly paid private army to heavily guard the perimeter, keeping the angry, impoverished locals as far away as possible. Because the wealth comes directly from the ground, the government no longer needs to tax its citizens. And if it doesn't tax them, it doesn't have to listen to them. The state becomes an isolated fortress, entirely financially independent from the very people it is supposed to govern and protect. The citizens become completely economically irrelevant. The national wealth bypasses the local economy entirely. It flows directly from the deep underground wells into massive fortified pipelines, transforming raw materials into pure capital. From there, it gets loaded onto foreign cargo ships, sailing away to global markets. And the profits are wired straight into secretive, untraceable offshore bank accounts. These offshore accounts belong exclusively to whoever happens to violently control the capital city and the military apparatus at that specific moment in time. This creates a terrifying environment where seizing political power guarantees absolute, unimaginable wealth. Suddenly, launching a violent military coup isn't just politics, it becomes an incredibly profitable business venture. Even if a country somehow miraculously avoids a violent civil war or a corrupt military coup, the resource curse will still attack it with a silent, invisible, and devastating economic poison. Economists call this terrifying phenomenon Dutch disease. The name originates from a massive crisis that hit the Netherlands in the late 1950s after they discovered a gigantic, highly valuable natural gas field hidden deep under the North Sea. Here is exactly how this invisible economic trap works. When a country starts exporting massive amounts of oil or natural gas, foreign countries have to buy that specific resource using the exporting nation's local currency. This sudden, overwhelming foreign demand causes the overall value of the exporting country's currency to skyrocket globally. Suddenly, your money is incredibly strong. At first, this sounds absolutely fantastic for the citizens. People can suddenly afford cheap, high-quality imported televisions, flashy sports cars, and luxury goods from overseas. But this artificially strong currency is secretly acting as a deadly parasite, destroying the rest of the nation's economy from the inside out. Because your currency is so highly valued, everything else your country produces, like agricultural crops, textiles, or manufactured goods, suddenly becomes astronomically expensive for the rest of the world to buy. Literally overnight, your local factories and farms can no longer compete on the global market. Because no one is buying their products, these businesses rapidly go bankrupt, shut down their operations, and are forced to lay off millions of hardworking citizens, leaving the entire economy hollowed out, resting dangerously on a single, fragile pillar. This creates a terrifying vulnerability. Because there is one undeniable truth about global markets: natural resource prices are notoriously volatile. Global commodity prices don't just gently fluctuate, they soar to the moon and crash to the floor in extreme, violent cycles. These dramatic price swings are entirely out of the country's control, based on unpredictable geopolitical events happening thousands of miles away. A minor political dispute on the other side of the planet, or a sudden shift in global green technology, can cause the price of oil or copper to inevitably crash. And when it does, which it absolutely always does, the hollowed-out country faces total catastrophe. Because the manufacturing and agricultural sectors were suffocated by Dutch disease years ago, there is absolutely nothing left to fall back on. No safety net. Government revenues evaporate instantly into thin air. Inflation spirals completely out of control. Grocery store shelves go empty, and basic survival becomes a daily struggle for the population. With the oil money gone, the government can no longer afford to pay its civil servants, or more dangerously, its heavily armed military. What started as a geographical miracle ends in hyperinflation, massive unemployment, and a total collapse of public order. The country is left with crushing, inescapable national debt, effectively wiping out decades of economic progress in a matter of months. But the terrible economics are just half the tragedy. The physical nature of the resources themselves dictates exactly how violent the curse will become. To understand why these wars happen, economists divide natural resources into two highly distinct categories: point source and diffuse. Point source resources, like a deep water oil rig or an enormous, high-tech copper mine, are heavily concentrated in one specific location. But diffuse resources, like alluvial diamonds panned from rivers or valuable timber spread across a massive jungle, are entirely different. They are easily lootable. Anyone with a simple shovel, a basic weapon, and sheer ruthlessness can easily extract them from the earth without needing expensive machinery. This grim geographical reality leads directly to the terrifying global nightmare widely known as conflict minerals or blood diamonds. Instead of a centralized government controlling the wealth, violent rebel groups and local warlords quickly seize complete control of these highly lucrative, easily lootable resource zones. They don't need expensive foreign engineers, they just need desperate, impoverished locals to dig. They extract these raw materials, whether it's rough diamonds, valuable timber, or the rare coltan desperately needed to manufacture your smartphone, and they quietly smuggle them across porous national borders, entirely bypassing the government, to sell on the incredibly profitable global black market. This is where the true, self-sustaining horror of the resource curse finally reveals itself to the world. The warlords use these massive, untraceable profits not to build schools or roads, but to buy more weapons, ammunition, and armored vehicles. They use the wealth to recruit thousands of new fighters, meaning the natural resources literally fund their own endless, self-sustaining wars. Here is the tragic math: a minor political dispute, or a small, resolvable regional grievance between two rival factions, suddenly gets injected with hundreds of millions of dollars in untraceable, completely unregulated mining revenue. This massive, unexpected influx of cash acts exactly like pouring a barrel of high-octane gasoline directly onto a small campfire. It instantly transforms what should have been short-term, localized political conflicts into brutal, multi-decade wars of attrition. These endless conflicts completely tear the fragile fabric of society apart, destroying infrastructure and displacing millions of innocent civilians. And yet, tragically, the precious diamonds, timber, and coltan keep flowing out to the rest of the world, completely uninterrupted by the chaos. And it gets even worse. Because the rest of the world is always watching closely, the wealth doesn't just disappear, it goes to the highest bidder. Superpowers and massive global corporations desperately need these exact raw materials to keep their own advanced, high-tech economies running smoothly. They need endless oceans of oil for their militaries, tons of cobalt for their billions of smartphones, and rare earth metals for their green technologies. When the stakes are measured in hundreds of billions of dollars, foreign powers rarely let local politics play out organically. If a democratically elected leader suddenly threatens to nationalize the oil fields to keep the profits inside the country, or demands a significantly fairer share of the mining revenues for their own citizens, foreign intervention becomes highly likely. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, we have seen foreign intelligence agencies secretly fund violent rebel groups, orchestrate covert military coups, or intentionally prop up brutal, compliant dictators who will do exactly what they are told. They do this simply to ensure a cheap, uninterrupted, and perfectly steady flow of valuable resources back to their home countries. Because of this, modern wars in resource-rich regions are almost never simple. Internal civil wars. They are highly complex proxy conflicts, heavily funded and armed by outside empires playing a grand geopolitical chess game, using the developing nation as their disposable, completely expendable board, while the foreign corporations secure their supply chains and the local warlords get incredibly rich. The general local population is forced to pay the ultimate, devastating price, trapped forever in a war that they never asked for. The curse seems completely inescapable, designed to destroy any nation it touches. So, is finding resources always a guaranteed death sentence? Not always. In 1969, Norway discovered one of the absolute largest offshore oil fields in the entire world, hidden deep beneath the freezing North Sea. But instead of collapsing into endless corruption, bloody civil wars, or suffering from the dreaded Dutch disease like so many others, Norway somehow miraculously transformed into one of the wealthiest, most stable, and economically egalitarian societies in human history. So, how exactly did they break the curse? The absolute most critical secret to their success was timing. Long before Norway ever found a single drop of oil, they had already spent centuries building incredibly strong, transparent democratic institutions. They already had a highly educated workforce, a free and critical press, and a robust, unshakable legal system firmly in place. When the massive, overwhelming wave of oil money finally started flowing in, the strong Norwegian government institutions held their ground. They didn't just hand the cash over to greedy politicians to blindly spend on massive vanity projects or unnecessary military expansions. Instead, they took almost all of those staggering revenues and locked them safely away in a massive, strictly controlled sovereign wealth fund. They took the oil profits and immediately invested them entirely outside of the country, buying international stocks, real estate, and foreign bonds. By doing this, they successfully sterilized the massive influx of cash, artificially shielding their domestic currency from skyrocketing out of control. This brilliant macroeconomic move saved the domestic factories and farms, completely avoiding the catastrophic hollowing out effect of Dutch disease. They fundamentally treated the oil not as free lottery money to be recklessly spent and enjoyed by the current population today, but as a temporary, finite inheritance that rightfully belonged to all future generations of Norwegians who had yet to be born. The tragic but empowering reality of the resource curse is this: geology is not destiny, but your institutions are. If you pour $1 billion into a country with strong laws and a free press, you get a thriving Norway. If you pour it into a country with weak institutions, you inevitably get a brutal, corrupt dictatorship that weaponizes that wealth against its own people. Today, as the world rapidly and desperately transitions away from fossil fuels, the curse is taking on a completely new shape. The geographic lottery is being dramatically redrawn. Now, countries sitting on massive, untapped deposits of lithium, cobalt, and copper are rapidly becoming the new, highly contested geopolitical battlegrounds of the 21st century. This green energy revolution has the incredible, historic potential to finally lift these nations completely out of poverty. But only if we desperately learn the dark, bloody lessons of the past. If the global community simply rushes in with heavy machinery to extract these new transition minerals without demanding transparency and fair compensation, the exact same tragic cycle of corruption, violence, and total economic collapse will simply repeat itself all over again. The ultimate, proven cure for the resource curse isn't leaving the precious wealth buried in the ground forever. It's about prioritizing the building of human capital and the unshakable democratic foundations necessary to actually handle the crushing, corrupting weight of that immense wealth when it is finally unearthed. Because true, lasting national wealth doesn't come from what lies buried beneath our feet, but from the people standing firmly on top of it. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, keep asking questions. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, keep asking questions.